When Donald Trump walked into that protest environment, the atmosphere shifted almost instantly. Cameras turned his way, his supporters leaned forward with anticipation, and his critics stiffened, ready for confrontation. For decades, Trump has relied on his ability to dominate a room with quick words and sharper put-downs. It has been one of his signature tools, to brand opponents with a label, an insult, or a nickname that sticks long after the initial exchange. At the Dallas protest that day, he turned that instinct on Representative Jasmine Crockett. His words came out blunt, and without hesitation. "You're a moron." Asterisk for Trump. This was nothing new. He has often used blunt name-calling as a weapon, a tactic to belittle rivals while simultaneously entertaining his base. The moment he said it, the crowd reacted the way crowds often do in these circumstances. Part of them cheered, part of them gasped. He knew how to throw a verbal punch, but this time, the target wasn't just another nameless critic. It was a sitting congresswoman known for her sharp tongue and ability to push back without losing her composure. That set the stage for something unusual. Asterisk, the insult was meant to silence, to put Crockett on the defensive. Trump has long understood that if he frames someone as unintelligent in public, it can follow them in the media cycle, define their image, and diminish their credibility. By calling her a moron in front of cameras and protesters, he likely assumed the word would stick. As many of his other insults have done over the years, the media would repeat it, amplify it, and in his usual fashion, he would own the headline for the day. Asterisk, but the reality in that moment was different from his calculation. Trump underestimated Crockett's ability to stand in front of a crowd and refuse to shrink under pressure. While his insult drew the usual reactions, it didn't land with the finality he may have expected. It came across less like a strategic barb and more like a frustrated outburst. Even some of his own supporters shifted uncomfortably, because the attack felt less like a sharp political jab and more like an offhand schoolyard taunt. Asterisk, the context also mattered. This wasn't a rally, filled only with Trump's supporters, where such language would be met with applause and reinforcement. It was a protest with a diverse crowd, cameras rolling, and microphones live. The insult wasn't just directed at Crockett, it was broadcast to millions of people who would watch the clip later. And in a world where every word can be repeated endlessly on social media, his insult lost the edge it might have had in a different setting. Asterisk, for years, Trump has built his persona on projecting dominance in conflict. He speaks louder, interrupts more forcefully, and cuts his opponents down with short jabs. At that protest, he applied the same formula, but this time, the environment didn't favor him. Crockett was prepared. The audience was primed for exchanges, and the cameras were waiting for a memorable sight. When he leaned into his trademark style and called her a moron, it didn't frame him as strong, it exposed the limits of his approach. Asterisk. The insult also revealed how Trump often views opponents, not as equal participants in a debate, but as targets, to be diminished. For some, that strategy has worked, particularly in settings where he can overwhelm someone before they have a chance to respond. Yet in this instance, Crockett didn't rush or stumble. She gave him no visible satisfaction of being shaken. The more composed she appeared, the less effective his insult became. By the time she readied her reply, the crowd's attention was no longer on the power of his words, but on how she would respond. Asterisk, calling her a moron was meant to brand her in that moment. Instead, it became the opening act of a sequence that would soon turn against him. His effort to undermine her backfired, not because the word lacked sting, but because Crockett's presence and timing made the insult seem hollow. What he tried to use as a weapon ended up highlighting the very weakness his opponents often accuse him of, resorting to name-calling when faced with direct challenges. Asterisk, would you like me to expand Keynote 2 in the same detailed 700-word storytelling style? Jasmine Crockett had every reason to fire back with the same kind of energy Donald Trump threw her way. Many politicians, when publicly insulted, instinctively lash out with their own list of retorts, sometimes shouting louder in order to regain control of the moment. That was the trap waiting for her after being called a moron, and Trump is skilled at creating those traps. He has built a career out of pulling people into his rhythm, making them respond on his terms, and then using their emotional reaction to confirm his original jab. But Crockett chose a different path that afternoon. Asterisk, instead of raising her voice or matching him insult for insult, she paused. The pause itself mattered. In a crowd buzzing with tension, silence has a way of grabbing attention. The microphones picked up the hum of voices, the shifting feet of protesters, the anticipation in the air. Trump had delivered his insult quickly, expecting the conversation to tilt in his direction, but Crockett's decision to stay calm under pressure flipped the stage dynamic. She wasn't going to let him dictate her response. Asterisk, her voice carried a tone of control when she finally leaned into her microphone. She didn't sound rattled, she didn't sound angry, and she certainly didn't sound like someone scrambling to defend themselves. The contrast between Trump's outburst and her composure was sharp enough that the crowd picked up on it immediately. The effect was almost like watching two people on different wavelengths, one trying to provoke, the other refusing to be provoked. Asterisk, that calmness was a strategy in itself. Trump thrives in chaos, where volume and repetition often drown out nuance. But Crockett's ability to remain steady denied him the chance to escalate the moment into a shouting match. She framed her words carefully, speaking not just to Trump but to the entire audience, those standing in front of her, and those who would later see the clip on television and online. Her response wasn't just about defending herself, it was about redefining the power balance in that instant. By the time she delivered her one-sentence reply, she had already shifted the mood of the protest. Her words landed not because they were meaner than his, but because they were sharper and more thoughtful. She turned his insult around without mirroring it, showing that she didn't need to play by his rules to win the exchange. Trump had used a blunt label to try to reduce her identity to a single word. Crockett, in contrast, expanded the conversation to include everyone watching. She made her answer about truth, accountability, and the broader public, effectively pulling Trump's insult out of the narrow frame he intended. The brilliance of her approach lay in how measured it was. Trump's strength has always been speed. He can throw out a quip before his opponent has even caught their breath. Crockett slowed the tempo. She made his comment linger long enough for the audience to evaluate it on its own. And by the time she spoke, people were ready to hear a counter. Her sentence didn't need to be long or complicated. It just needed to underline that she was in control of herself, while he had lost his cool. Observers in the crowd could sense the shift. Some of Trump's supporters shouted in his defense, but the energy wasn't the same as when he first hurled the insult. Crockett's.com presence had redirected the attention. Even those who disagreed with her politics had to recognize that she had not allowed herself to be cornered. In politics, perception is often as powerful as policy, and the perception in that moment was clear. She looked steady. He looked reactive. What Trump didn't anticipate was how quickly her poise would translate into a narrative outside the protest. Cameras love contrast, and the footage gave viewers exactly that. On one side was Trump, visibly animated, his words quick and biting. On the other was Crockett, measured, deliberate, and sharp without raising her voice. That juxtaposition created an image that resonated more powerfully than if she had shouted back. By staying calm, Crockett not only neutralized the insult, but also demonstrated how Trump's style can backfire when met with composure. His approach depends on rattling opponents, making them seem smaller or less capable under pressure. Her refusal to play into that script showed the crowd something different. That strength doesn't always have to be loud, and that calmness, when used strategically, can be even more disarming than a counterattack. Do you want me to continue this process and expand Keynote 3 into 700 words as well? The moment Jasmine Crockett delivered her reply, the protest crowd shifted from murmurs of shock to a wave of energy that rolled through the streets. People began clapping, some whistled, and others raised their phones higher to make sure they captured what had just unfolded. Trump, who had long relied on crowds responding to his words, suddenly found that the audience wasn't echoing his insult, but instead rallying around the person he had tried to diminish. The applause wasn't just about Crockett's it was about the way she had handled herself against someone who was famous for putting others on the defensive. Trump is no stranger to commanding a crowd. He knows how to stir them up with quick lines, and he thrives on applause breaks. But this time, the cheers weren't for him. They were for someone who had just turned his own tactic against him, in front of cameras. Crockett's ability to capture the audience's support was striking because it undercut one of Trump's strongest political instincts: his control over public reaction. When she spoke, she wasn't trying to outshout him. She was giving the people around her a chance to decide whose words carried more weight. Their reaction made the answer clear. The applause grew, and laughter rippled through the crowd as people processed what had just happened. Some supporters of Trump tried to push back, yelling in his defense, but their voices were drowned out by the larger wave of clapping and cheers. It was an unusual sight. Trump, who has spent years mastering the art of crowd dominance, standing in a moment where the audience had clearly chosen someone else's words as the line worth remembering. What gave Crockett the edge wasn't just the content of her response, but the way the crowd received it. She didn't tell them to cheer. She didn't demand attention. She let her words settle, and the audience responded naturally. That authenticity resonated far more deeply than Trump's insult. His supporters might have wanted to laugh at his jab, but they couldn't ignore the fact that the larger reaction was working against him. It was a subtle but powerful shift in momentum. For Trump. The optics were damaging. Cameras zoomed in on faces in the crowd, capturing the smiles and nods as people reacted to Crockett. Those images contrasted sharply with his expression, which for a brief moment looked unsettled. He had always thrived on commanding the center of attention, but here was a protest where the applause wasn't his. In politics, moments like these matter because they travel quickly. Clips replayed online don't just capture words, they capture the mood of the audience. And in this case, the crowd had chosen sides. Crockett's ability to win the audience was also symbolic of something larger. Trump had built a reputation for being untouchable in verbal exchanges. Someone who could throw insults without ever losing his grip on the narrative. Yet here, a single sentence had redirected the entire energy of a protest. The cheers weren't just noise. They were a public verdict that the insult had failed. It was as if the crowd itself was telling him that the old tactic didn't work in this setting. Asterisk, the viral nature of the exchange only amplified the effect. Within minutes, clips began spreading across social media, where users replayed the crowd's reaction as much as they replayed the words themselves. Online, people joked that Trump had been out-cheered, a phrase that underscored the fact that the applause wasn't a side noted, was the story. Crockett's.com but sharp response had created a moment that belonged to her, not to him, and the public's reaction had sealed it. Asterisk, even commentators who usually avoided giving Crockett attention found themselves acknowledging the exchange because the crowd's support made it impossible to ignore. Trump had tried to define her with one word, but the cheers that followed her response gave her a stronger definition in that moment. Someone who could stand toe-to-toe with him and not flinch. That perception is powerful because it challenges the narrative Trump has spent years building about being the dominant voice in any room. Asterisk. The scene at the protest proved how fragile control of a crowd can be, even for someone as experienced as Trump. One sentence, delivered with composure, had shifted the momentum completely. The applause didn't erase his words, but it neutralized them in real time. By the end of the exchange, it was clear that Crockett hadn't just responded to an insult. She had taken the energy he tried to use against her and redirected it into applause that worked in her favor. Asterisk, would you like me to move on and expand Keynote 4 in the same 700-word storytelling style? The moment the video clip of Jasmine Crockett's exchange with Donald Trump began circulating online, it was clear that the story had taken on a life of its own. What might have been just another protest, confrontation turned into a defining soundbite replayed again and again across platforms. The focus wasn't on Trump's insult, as he might have intended, but on Crockett's measured response and the way the crowd had rallied to her side. In a media environment where narratives are shaped within hours, Trump found himself in an unfamiliar position. He had created the headline, but he didn't control it. Asterisk, for years, Trump has been the master of viral moments. Whether through a quip, a rally line, or an unexpected insult, he has consistently known how to dominate news cycles. But this incident worked differently. The clip wasn't framed as Trump commanding the stage. Instead, it was replayed as an example of him being knocked off balance. Crockett's one sentence was repeated on late-night programs, dissected on talk shows, and celebrated by her supporters as an instance of standing firm against someone who rarely gets outmaneuvered in public. Asterisk, the power of the viral clip lay in its simplicity. Viewers didn't need context or background to understand what happened. They saw Trump call her a moron, and they saw her calmly turn it back on him with a line that resonated beyond the protest itself. That clarity made it easy for the moment to spread, and in politics, moments that spread unchecked can reshape how people view even the most established figures. For Trump, the perception that he had been silenced, even briefly, undercut the image of control he has carefully maintained. Asterisk, social media accelerated that perception. Hashtags appeared within hours, memes followed, and users across the spectrum weighed in. Supporters of Crockett praised her poise, while even some commentators who usually defended Trump admitted the exchange hadn't gone in his favor. What had been intended as a quick put-down turned into a lasting reminder of how fragile control can be in an era where every word is instantly scrutinized and replayed. Asterisk. Trump himself seemed to recognize how quickly the moment had slipped from his grasp. In the days that followed, he avoided direct reference to Crockett's comeback, choosing instead to shift focus to other topics. This was unusual for him, as he often doubled down on insults if he believed they resonated. The silence was telling. It suggested that he understood any further mention of her would only bring more attention back to the viral clip. By not addressing it, he ceded the space. Something rare for a figure who thrives on constant engagement. Asterisk, meanwhile, Crockett gained momentum from the exchange. Interviews highlighted her ability to keep her composure. Commentators applauded her restraint, and the narrative that emerged was that she had stood her ground against one of the most unyielding figures in American politics. The fact that her moment came at Trump's expense made it all the more powerful. She didn't just answer back, she created a scene in which Trump, for once, was not the one dictating the conversation. Asterisk, the larger lesson from the episode was about how quickly public clashes can flip when words are caught on camera. Trump had entered the protest confident in his ability to dominate with language, but the clip showed that control can vanish with a single response if the timing and delivery are right. The idea that someone could make him lose command of a moment so visibly with just one sentence challenged the perception of his invulnerability. For a politician who has built his brand on always winning exchanges, that was no small setback. Asterisk, the way the clip spread also highlighted a shift in audience power. In past years, Trump's insults often lived on because his supporters amplified them. This time, the audience both in person and online chose to amplify Crockett's words instead. That collective choice transformed the moment from a protest skirmish into a cultural talking point. By the time news outlets covered it, the public had already framed it as Crockett's win, not his. Even though Trump still commanded a loyal base, the incident showed how vulnerable his style could be when met with sharp, composed responses. His approach of reducing opponents with blunt words depended on them reacting emotionally. Crockett's refusal to do so flipped the script, and once the crowd and the internet backed her up, the insult lost its bite. Instead of Crockett being remembered as the target of his remark, Trump was remembered as the one who got outdone. Do you want me to now combine all 4 expanded keynotes into a continuous long-form script for your channel Mystic Memoirs, so it flows as one complete storytelling piece? What unfolded that day at the Dallas protest was more than a clash of personalities. It was a lesson in how words, timing, and composure can shift the entire balance of a public exchange. Donald Trump, known for his sharp and often bruising verbal style, leaned into his familiar tactic of using an insult to establish dominance. For years, this approach has served him well, allowing him to control narratives, unsettle opponents, and capture headlines. But on this occasion, the formula faltered. Jasmine Crockett, instead of taking the bait, turned the moment into an opportunity. Her reply was not only a defense of herself, but also a direct reframing of the exchange. By keeping her tone calm and her words concise, she denied Trump the chaotic confrontation he thrives on. That contrast his outburst against her composure created a powerful image that the crowd and later, the internet seized upon. It wasn't just about who had the sharper words. It was about who appeared to have control. And in that moment, it was clearly Crockett. The reaction of the crowd sealed the outcome. Applause, laughter, and cheers transformed her response into something bigger than just a comeback. It became a collective judgment, a public acknowledgement that she had managed to outmaneuver a figure who rarely loses control of the stage. The fact that this played out in real time, with cameras capturing every second, gave it a permanence that Trump couldn't easily shake off. No amount of spin could erase the fact that his insult hadn't landed the way he intended. Once the clip went viral, the balance of the story tilted even further. Social media thrives on moments of reversal when someone expected to dominate is instead caught off guard. Trump's reputation as a master of the microphone made the clip all the more striking. People weren't just watching Crockett answer back, they were watching Trump's usual strategy fall flat. That made it replayable, shareable, and memorable in a way that his insult alone never could have been. For Crockett, the exchange became a defining example of how a politician can handle confrontation without sacrificing composure. For Trump, it was a reminder that even the most practiced tactics have limits when met with sharp timing and audience awareness. The protest didn't end his influence, but it showed that moments of vulnerability exist, even for someone who has built a brand on projecting strength. The larger takeaway from the incident is that control of a narrative is never guaranteed. No matter how experienced or confident a figure may be, in the age of instant replay and viral clips, the public has as much power as the speaker. The crowd chose Crockett's words as the ones worth remembering, and in doing so, they redefined the entire encounter. That day illustrated that political power isn't only about titles or crowds, it's about moments. One sentence, delivered with calm precision, can shift attention, rewrite headlines, and even silence someone who has built a career on never being silenced. And in Dallas, on that afternoon, Jasmine Crockett proved just how much weight